David Chen had been a train conductor for 23 years. Every morning at 5:15 a.m., he'd board the Northeastern Express, a commuter train that carried hundreds of passengers from the suburbs into the heart of Boston. David was known for his precision, never early, never late, always exactly on schedule. But what his colleagues didn't know was David's ritual before every shift. In his small apartment, he'd kneel before a wooden statue of the Virgin Mary that his grandmother had brought from the Philippines 50 years ago. "Please, Mother Mary," he'd whisper, "keep my passengers safe today. Guide my hands and my decisions." His wife, Linda, would watch from the doorway, a soft smile on her face. After 30 years of marriage, she knew David's faith was as much a part of him as his heartbeat. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, David's prayer was the same as always. He kissed Linda goodbye, grabbed his thermos of coffee, and headed to the train yard. The morning was unremarkable. Cool autumn air, leaves turning gold and red, passengers filing onto the train with their coffee cups and newspapers. David checked his watch. 6:47 a.m., right on schedule. He settled into the conductor's seat, ran through his pre-departure checklist, and began the route he'd taken thousands of times before. Everything was normal. Everything was routine. David had no idea that in exactly 43 minutes, his life and the lives of 300 passengers would depend on 3 words he was about to hear. The train rolled smoothly through the suburbs, picking up speed as it entered the stretch of track David knew by heart. Station after station, passengers boarded and departed. By 7:15 a.m., the train was at near capacity. Business people heading to work, students going to university, elderly passengers traveling to medical appointments. David estimated about 300 souls on board. The road ahead was straightforward, a long, straight section of track through a wooded area, then a gradual curve before approaching the Newton Hills Tunnel. David had navigated this section tens of thousands of times. The speed limit here was 70 miles per hour, and the train was cruising comfortably at 68. Then, at exactly 7:29 a.m., David heard it, a voice, not through the radio, not from the passenger compartments, but clear and unmistakable, as if someone was standing right beside him. "Brake now." The voice was feminine, calm, but firm, carrying an authority that made his entire body respond before his mind could question. David's hand shot to the emergency brake. Years of training told him this made no sense. There were no signals, no warnings, no obstacles visible ahead. But something deeper than training, deeper than logic, made him pull that brake with all his strength. The train's wheels screamed against the rails. The sudden deceleration threw passengers forward in their seats. Coffee spilled, bags fell, people shouted in confusion and alarm. David's heart hammered in his chest as the train slowed rapidly, 60 miles per hour, 50, 40, 30. "What am I doing?" he thought, panic rising. "I'll lose my job. There's no reason for—" Then he saw it. 300 yards ahead, where the track entered a gentle curve before the tunnel, something was terribly wrong. At first, David couldn't process what he was seeing. The rails, they were gone, not just damaged, completely absent. A massive section of track, at least 50 feet long, had collapsed into a sinkhole that had opened in the earth beneath it. The train continued to slow, 20 miles per hour, 15, 10. David's hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold the brake lever. If he had been traveling at full speed when he reached that gap, the train would have plunged into the sinkhole. 300 passengers. The cars would have piled into each other, crushed together like an accordion. The train came to a complete stop exactly 72 feet from the edge of the collapsed section. David sat frozen, unable to breathe, unable to think. Through the front window, he could see the massive hole where the track should have been. Trees and earth had fallen away, leaving a crater at least 30 feet deep. His radio crackled to life. "Northeastern Express, this is dispatch. We're receiving reports of—" David grabbed the radio with trembling hands. "Dispatch, this is Chen. We've stopped. There's a complete track collapse ahead of our position. I need emergency services immediately." In the passenger cars, confusion turned to understanding as people pressed against windows and saw what lay ahead. Then silence. The kind of silence that comes when people realize how close they came to death. David looked at the statue of the Virgin Mary he kept on a small shelf by his seat, a miniature version of the one at home. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. "She always watches over those who ask." Within 30 minutes, the site was swarmed with emergency vehicles, news crews, and railway officials. Passengers were evacuated and transported by buses. Engineers examined the sinkhole, shaking their heads in disbelief. "Underground water erosion," one explained. "It must have been developing for weeks, maybe months. The ground just gave way sometime in the last hour." David sat in the train yard office, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm afternoon sun, as investigators questioned him. "Mr. Chen," the lead investigator said, "you stopped the train approximately 1 minute before you would have reached the collapse. Your logs show no warning signals, no radio communication, no visual confirmation of the hazard. What made you brake?" David looked at the man, official, skeptical, waiting for a rational explanation. He thought about his career, his reputation, how this would sound. Then he thought about 300 people going home to their families that night because he had listened. "I heard a voice," David said quietly. "It told me to brake." The investigator wrote something down. "A voice. Can you be more specific?" David met his eyes. "The Virgin Mary told me to brake. I know how that sounds, but I've prayed to her every day for 23 years, and today she answered." The official investigation concluded that David had demonstrated exceptional situational awareness and instinct. The railway company called him a hero. News stations interviewed passengers who called it a miracle. But David knew the truth. That night, he knelt before the wooden statue in his apartment, Linda standing in the doorway as she always did. This time, tears streamed down his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for 300 lives. Thank you for answering." The statue remained silent, its painted face serene and unchanging. But David swore he could feel warmth emanating from the wood, a presence that wrapped around him like an embrace. He had heard the voice when it mattered most, and 300 people were alive because he had listened.